Hello friends. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. The day we found the first note taped to our front door was my son Noah's 8th birthday, October 2019. We'd only been in the house for 3 weeks. My wife, Rachel, and I had spent every last dollar scraping together the down payment for this place in Willow Creek Heights, a quiet suburb about 40 minutes outside Portland. We thought it would be our fresh start: clean air, big trees, and a real backyard where Noah could play with his dog instead of hearing car alarms and shouting through the thin apartment walls we'd lived with for years. That morning, I went out to get the paper while Rachel was making pancakes shaped like stars. Noah was still in his Spider-Man pajamas, bouncing around the kitchen, too excited for his party later that afternoon. That's when I saw it. A folded sheet of lined notebook paper, duct-taped right in the center of our front door. The handwriting was sharp and pressed hard into the paper, like whoever wrote it was angry. It said, "People like you don't belong here. Leave before things get ugly." No name, no explanation, just that. Rachel thought it must have been for the previous owners, a retired couple who'd sold quickly to move closer to their grandkids. Maybe someone had a grudge against them. Still, the note bothered me. The words, "people like you," echoed in my head all morning, but I shoved it into my pocket. I didn't want to ruin Noah's birthday. The party went great at first. 20 kids running through the inflatable bounce house, music blasting, the smell of hot dogs in the air. But around 4 p.m., while refilling drinks, I noticed someone standing near the end of our driveway. He was an older man, 60s, maybe early 70s, wearing a faded brown windbreaker zipped up to his chin despite the warm October sun. He stood perfectly still, just watching the kids play. His hands were tucked into his jacket pockets, and his pale blue eyes didn't blink once. When I stepped toward him, he slowly turned and walked away. Not fast, not like he was running, but like he'd already finished what he came for. That night, after the last balloon popped and Noah crashed in bed, I went outside to put the trash out. The driveway was quiet, too quiet. That's when I heard footsteps on the gravel beside our house, steady, evenly spaced. Not the light scuffle of an animal. Human steps. I grabbed the old baseball bat I kept in the garage and walked toward the noise, but whoever it was had already gone. The motion light flicked on, revealing fresh boot prints leading from the side gate to our bedroom window, then back again. Rachel wanted to call the police, but what could we say? Someone walked on our gravel? They'd probably just tell us to install cameras. So that's exactly what I did. 3 days later, we found the second note. It was wedged under the windshield wiper of my car. This one was typed, printed on plain white paper. "You were warned. We know when you leave for work at 7:15. We know your wife takes your boy to soccer practice on Thursdays. We know which window you forget to lock." That last line hit me hard, because they were right. The small bathroom window above the tub had a broken latch since move-in. We'd mentioned it to nobody, not even the realtor. Someone had been watching our house, maybe even tried to get inside. I spent the rest of that day wiring up cameras on every corner of the property. 8 total, all linked to my phone. While mounting one above the garage, I spotted the same man from before, the one in the brown windbreaker. He was across the street this time, talking to our neighbor, Janice, who'd brought over a casserole our first week there. They kept glancing toward me while they talked. When Janice noticed me looking, she quickly went inside. The man, though, he stayed, just staring. that same faint smirk on his face. That night, when I checked the footage, I saw him again, standing on the sidewalk at 3:42 a.m., motionless for nearly an hour, just watching our house. The third note came while we were eating dinner. We actually heard the sound, the faint whisper of paper sliding under the door. I ran to open it, but the porch was empty. This one was handwritten again, red ink this time. The previous owners were smart to leave. You should have asked them why. Your boy has such a bright smile. You wouldn't want anything to happen to it. Rachel broke down, crying right there at the table. The mention of Noah, his smile, was too much. She wanted to leave immediately. I called the police that night, filed a report, and showed them the notes. They promised to look into it, but said it could be a prank. They didn't even dust for prints. The next morning, I went door to door talking to neighbors. Most avoided eye contact. Some said they hadn't seen anything strange. One old man, Harold, who lived 4 houses down, finally told me the truth. He invited me into his garage, closed the door, and spoke in a low voice. He said for years there had been a small group of self-appointed watchdogs on our street. Older residents who didn't like newcomers. They called themselves the Keepers of Willow Creek. They'd done the same thing to several families before us. Harassment, notes, vandalism, always driving people out before they could settle. The man in the brown jacket. His name was Frank Dalton, a former security guard who'd been fired for excessive force a decade ago. Apparently, he believed he still had a duty to protect the neighborhood from outsiders. Harold told me the others in the group were Greg Hoffman, Alan Pierce, and Mark Dale, all longtime residents who met weekly at Greg's house. He warned me to be careful, said they had friends in the local police. That night, Rachel insisted we stay at her sister's place for a few days, but I couldn't leave. Not yet. I needed proof. At 2:19 a.m., I woke to the sound of breaking glass. Not outside. Inside. I grabbed my phone, hit record, and crept down the stairs. The living room window was shattered. A brick lay on the carpet with another note wrapped around it. "We told you to go. This is your final warning." Through the backyard window, I caught movement. 2 shadows running toward the fence. One of them had the same hunched posture, same jacket. Frank Dalton. The police actually responded this time, probably because of the broken glass. But it didn't help much. An officer named Brennan pulled me aside and said quietly, "Off the record. Frank's cousin works in the department. You might be better off moving." I'm sorry, that's when I realized we were on our own. The next morning, Rachel packed Noah's clothes into 2 suitcases. She said she'd had enough. She and Noah were going to her sister's in Denver until things were sorted. I didn't argue. But I also didn't plan on leaving. That afternoon, I installed indoor cameras and upgraded all the locks to smart deadbolts connected to my phone. Then I did something a little illegal. While Frank's truck was parked outside the grocery store, I slipped a GPS tracker behind his rear bumper. That night, I followed the data. Every evening around 11 p.m., Frank's truck stopped at the same house, 2 streets over. Registered to Greg Hoffman, the same name Harold had mentioned. I started documenting everything. The comings, goings, times, license plates. It became an obsession. I wanted airtight evidence. On the 4th night alone, at exactly 3:03 a.m., my backyard camera picked up motion. Frank again. He tried the back door, jiggled the handle. When it didn't open, he spit on the welcome mat and walked over to Rachel's garden, where he unzipped his pants and urinated on the soil. That was it. I was done being scared. The next morning, I went to the county law library downtown and researched harassment and conspiracy laws. Then I started digging into public records. Greg Hoffman had been sued twice both times by minority families who'd left the area soon after. Both cases had quietly disappeared after undisclosed settlements. That night, I made my move. I uploaded everything, every note, every photo, every second of video to social media. I posted it on the Willow Creek neighborhood Facebook group, Nextdoor, Twitter, everywhere. I included the names and faces of all 4 men, along with screenshots from my cameras. Within hours, it exploded. Over 700 shares in a single night. Comments flooded in. People outraged, shocked, horrified. Local reporters reached out before sunrise. By noon, there were news vans outside my house. The headline on TV read, "Neighborhood Watch or Neighborhood Terror." The pressure worked. By that evening, police had reopened the case. Frank Dalton was arrested for attempted break-in, harassment, and intimidation. Greg Hoffman and the 2 others were charged with conspiracy and making terroristic threats. Turns out, the FBI even stepped in when they found a private chat group where these men bragged about their operations, targeting new families, using intimidation to keep the neighborhood pure. It made me sick reading the messages. They laughed about how scared kids would cry at night, how they protected the street from change. Even worse, Officer Brennan's tip was true. One of Frank's cousins worked in the department. He was suspended after the internal investigation proved he'd buried multiple prior complaints. 2 weeks later, Rachel and Noah came back home. Frank was denied bail, and the others were awaiting trial. For the first time in months, the air on Willow Creek Drive felt light again. Neighbors started talking to each other. Kids rode bikes together. Even Janice, the one who'd seemed distant, came over crying. She said Frank had threatened her husband to keep quiet, or they'd be next. Noah's laughter filled the backyard again, and Rachel replanted her garden, this time with bright sunflowers. We lived there for another 6 years before moving for my job in Seattle. We left that house on our own terms, not because of fear, but because it was simply time. Harold, the old man who'd helped me, became like family. He passed away last winter. At his funeral, someone mentioned that our street had never had another incident. Since that night, the truth came out. And I believe it. Because once you drag monsters into the light, they lose all their power. I don't know if standing up to those men made me brave. Maybe it just made me tired. But if there's one thing I learned, it's this. Evil doesn't always come from strangers in dark alleys. Sometimes, it's the man trimming his lawn across the street. The one who smiles when you wave. You can't always stop people from hating, but you can stop them from hiding. When we first pulled into the driveway that June afternoon, I thought the house looked like every dream we'd ever talked about. Old, quiet, and surrounded by endless green. It sat on 2 acres of thick Oregon forest, the kind that hums with insects even in daylight. My wife, Rachel, and I had just signed the papers that morning, finally leaving our cramped apartment in Portland behind. The house had been sitting empty for more than half a year. The realtor told us the previous owner, an older man named Harold Benton, had passed away suddenly with no family to inherit the place. The bank was eager to offload it, and the price was too good to ignore. Sure, it needed work, the leaky roof, the outdated kitchen, but to us, it felt like freedom. That first day, while Rachel started unpacking boxes inside, I went to check out the detached garage at the edge of the property. The thing looked ancient, peeling white paint, vines creeping up one wall, and a heavy steel door that didn't want to move. It took both hands, a grunt, and a full body push before it screeched upward, throwing a cloud of dust and that unmistakable smell of oil and rust into the air. Inside, it looked exactly like time had stopped sometime in the 1980s. There were tools on a pegboard, stacks of warped lumber, and a busted riding mower sitting under a tarp. The light barely reached the back, but as my eyes adjusted, something about the far wall caught my attention. A huge metal shelving unit crammed with paint cans and jars filled with old screws. Something told me to move it. It wasn't curiosity exactly, more like instinct. I don't even know why. But when I gripped the edge of that shelf and started to pull, I realized it wasn't flush against the wall like it should have been. There was a gap, and behind it, a line. A door. Painted the exact same off-white as the wall around it. So well camouflaged I'd never have noticed it if I hadn't looked closely. But what really sent a chill down my back was the lock. A thick industrial padlock, polished and new. Everything else in that garage was rusted and forgotten, but this thing looked like it had been put on yesterday. "Rachel!" I called out, my voice echoing off the concrete. She came in a minute later, wiping her hands on a towel. When I showed her the door, she frowned. "Was this in the listing?" "No, I don't remember any mention of it," I said. She hesitated, glancing at the lock. Maybe we should leave it alone? But I was already scanning the workbench for tools. I found a rusted crowbar and a hammer and went to work. Whoever installed that lock wasn't messing around. The screws bit deep, the bracket thick with metal. Sweat ran down my temples as I pried and cursed under my breath. After nearly 20 minutes, the final screw tore loose with a crack that echoed through the garage. And that's when the smell hit us. Not mold, not rot. It was the smell of a place that had been lived in. The sour, claustrophobic mix of body odor, canned food, and stale air. Rachel gagged, covering her mouth, while I pointed my phone's flashlight into the dark. The space inside was small, maybe 8 feet by 10. Wooden walls, concrete floor. And it wasn't empty. A sleeping bag lay on the floor, still showing the depression of someone's body. Next to it sat a line of canned goods, all with expiration dates from just a month ago. There was a lantern on a milk crate, a couple of water jugs, and some men's clothes hanging from nails in the wall. But the thing that froze me solid was the notebook sitting on the sleeping bag. I opened it carefully, and my breath caught. Each page was filled with cramped handwriting, dates, times, and notes about the house. "Lights on in kitchen 9:12 p.m. Car left driveway 7:30 a.m. Old man collapsed. No movement for 2 hours." The last entry made my skin crawl. New owners arrive tomorrow. Need to stay quiet. Rachel's hand clamped around my arm. "Oh my God, Mike, he's been watching this house." We backed out of the room and called 911 right away. The dispatcher told us to stay inside, lock the doors, and wait. Those 15 minutes before the sheriff's deputies arrived felt like hours. I stood by the garage window with a hammer in my hand, my heart pounding at every sound from the woods. When Deputy Caroline Briggs and her partner arrived, they went through the hidden room carefully, photographing everything. She said it wasn't uncommon for squatters to hide out in abandoned properties, but she admitted this setup seemed too deliberate, too focused. She bagged the notebook and told us they'd send patrols for the next few nights. Before leaving, she even helped us install a new padlock on that secret door. That night, neither of us could sleep. Every creak, every gust of wind against the siding made me flinch. Rachel wanted to leave, but we'd already turned in the keys to our apartment. There was nowhere to go. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up to a sound that sliced right through the silence. Metal on metal. It came from the direction of the garage. I grabbed a baseball bat and crept to the front window. Rachel followed, holding her phone with trembling hands, ready to call the cops again. The new motion sensor light I'd installed earlier that day was glowing bright, spilling light over the driveway and the side of the garage. At first, I saw nothing. Then, movement. A man in dark clothes crouched near the door, his hands gripping a pair of bolt cutters. Even from a distance, I could see the concentration in his face. The quick, practiced motion of someone who'd done this before. I slammed my hand against the window, shouting without thinking. His head snapped up. For one terrifying second, our eyes locked. Pale face, rough beard, thin frame, maybe mid-40s. He froze, expression flickering from shock to rage, then dropped the cutters and bolted into the trees. Rachel was already on the phone with 911. The deputies arrived 15 minutes later, but he was gone. All they found were the bolt cutters and footprints leading toward the woods. When Briggs returned the next morning, she looked tired and worried. She showed us a photo on her phone. "Recognize him?" she asked. I did. Those same haunted eyes. "That's Dale Benton, Harold's nephew," she explained. "He's got a record. Drugs, theft, breaking and entering. Harold cut him out of the will completely. The estate couldn't find him when the house went into probate. It hit me all at once. The surveillance notes, the fresh food, the hidden room. He'd been living here since Harold's death, watching everything, waiting." They launched a search that day with dogs and flashlights. The trail led about half a mile into the forest, where they found his camp, a tarp shelter, piles of supplies, and dozens of photos of the property. Photos of us unloading boxes, smiling by the moving truck. He'd been there, watching, the entire time. The next few days were a blur. We installed cameras on every corner, changed the locks again, even had Rachel's sister come stay with us for safety. I barely slept, glued to the monitor feeds at night. For 3 nights, nothing happened. I started to think maybe he'd moved on. Then, on the 4th night, I was reviewing camera footage before bed when I noticed it. At 2:41 a.m., just beyond the edge of the floodlight, a shape stood between the trees. Still, watching. I zoomed in, blurry but unmistakable. The same build, the same posture. He stayed there for nearly an hour, never moved closer, just stood there. When I showed the footage to Briggs the next morning, she swore softly under her breath. They brought in state police, who found similar sightings from other cameras in the area. Rural homes, back roads, even a gas station 2 towns away where he'd been caught on video buying supplies. Always late at night. Always alone. They said he knew these woods too well. What scared me most wasn't that he was coming back. It was that he wasn't doing anything. He wasn't breaking in. Wasn't trying to reclaim the room. He was just watching, like the house itself was something sacred to him. Weeks passed like that. A slow, suffocating paranoia. Every night Rachel and I checked the cameras. Every night I half expected to see him there again. Then, one early morning in August, it happened. Rachel shook me awake at 3 a.m. "He's back," she whispered. I ran to the monitor. The garage door camera showed movement, a figure kneeling beside the padlock again. This time, we were ready. I hit the floodlights while Rachel called 911. Our neighbor, Brian, an ex-Marine who'd been helping us keep watch, pulled his truck across the driveway, blocking the exit. The man, Dale, froze in the blinding light, his hands lifting slowly. He didn't run this time. He just stood there, breathing heavily, eyes wide. There was something almost broken in his expression, like he'd finally realized the fight was over. When the deputies arrived, he went quietly. No struggle. No shouting. They found more photos in his backpack, some of Harold from years before and others of us. Even close-ups of Rachel sitting on the porch in the evening. He'd been living 3 miles away in an abandoned ranger cabin, still convinced this property belonged to him, that we were trespassers in his home. He's in custody now, waiting for trial. The DA says he'll likely take a plea deal for stalking and unlawful entry. We've decided to sell the house. A young couple is already in escrow, and I'm not about to ruin their dreams by telling them everything. Rachel found a new place closer to town. Neighbors on both sides. Streetlights. Noise. Safety. Sometimes when I drive past the old place, it looks peaceful. Sunlight dripping through the trees. The garage door closed like it's keeping a secret. But I know what's behind that wall. Some places remember the people who refuse to leave, even when they're gone. And sometimes, the only way to survive is to let the ghosts keep what's theirs. When I signed the papers for my first house in the quiet town of Maple Hollow, I thought I'd finally made it. I was 32, done with leases and noisy upstairs neighbors, ready to start a calm, grown-up life. The house wasn't huge, just a modest, single-story home with beige siding and a cracked driveway. But it was mine. It sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, lined with maple trees that dropped their leaves like golden rain every fall. The air smelled like cut grass and wood smoke. My realtor called it a peaceful neighborhood, and for the first few days, that's exactly what it was. I spent my first week unpacking boxes, blasting music, and feeling like I'd finally escaped the chaos of city apartments. The couple next door, the Crawfords, were kind and chatty. They baked cookies, told me about the local farmer's market, even lent me their lawnmower. But the house on the other side, that was a different story. It was a faded green two-story with boarded-up attic windows and an overgrown front yard. The "For Sale" sign was half-rotted, leaning against a fence swallowed by vines. I figured it was abandoned, until the first time I saw someone moving behind the curtain. It was a man, late 40s, maybe 50. Pale, unshaven, wearing a dark jacket even though it was mid-August. When he noticed me watching, he froze, didn't wave, didn't smile, just stared. A few days later, I decided to do the polite thing and introduce myself. It was a Saturday morning, bright and warm, and I walked over holding a six-pack as a neighborly peace offering. It took nearly a full minute before the door creaked open. The man stood there, half in shadow. His name, he said after a long pause, was Martin Hale. His voice was dry and quiet, like he wasn't used to talking much. When I introduced myself, "Ben Carter, just moved in next door," he just nodded. His eyes darted behind me toward my house. Then he asked, "You live there alone?" I tried to laugh it off. "Yeah, just me and my mess of boxes for now." He didn't laugh, didn't even blink, just kept looking past me, at my front window, like he was studying something. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine, even though it was 80 degrees outside. The whole exchange lasted maybe 4 minutes, but it felt longer. When I turned to leave, Martin called out softly, "You shouldn't stay out late." Things get strange here after dark. I remember standing there, confused. "Sorry, what do you mean?" But he'd already shut the door. That was the first moment I felt something was wrong about this place. Within a week, small things started happening. I'd find random junk in my yard, an old screwdriver, a broken clock, a child's shoe. None of it was mine. At first, I figured they blew over from somewhere, but each object was always placed neatly, like someone had set it there intentionally. Then, I started seeing Martin everywhere. Whenever I stepped outside, whether to get the mail, water the plants, or take out the trash, he'd suddenly appear in his yard. Sometimes he pretended to rake leaves that weren't there. Sometimes he just stood beside his shed, staring. The Crawfords must have noticed too. Mrs. Crawford once whispered, "Just keep your distance from that man, dear." His last neighbor didn't stay long. That night, I barely slept. The first real scare came about 3 weeks in. It was around 2:30 a.m. I woke up to the sound of metal scraping outside my bedroom window. For a second, I thought it was a tree branch. But when I peeked through the blinds, Martin was crouched in my backyard with a flashlight. He wasn't doing yard work. He wasn't lost. He was looking directly into my window. When I shouted his name, he didn't flinch. Just turned off the flashlight slowly and said, "You've got animals under your deck. Dangerous ones." I was trying to help. His voice was calm. Too calm. I told him to get off my property before I called the police. He smiled, just a faint, empty smile, and walked away without a word. The next morning, I bought motion sensor lights and a couple of cameras. I started double-checking the locks before bed. But it didn't stop. The weird gifts kept coming, only now they were personal. A photo of my house printed from an old real estate listing. A small wooden carving of my mailbox. A torn page from a home insurance policy with my name written across it in block letters. And then there was the bird. A dead cardinal, wings spread wide on my welcome mat. Its body positioned perfectly straight, like it had been placed there with care. I called the local sheriff after that. Deputy Reed showed up, a big man with a tired expression. He looked around, asked a few questions, and shrugged. "Unless he's threatening you directly, there's not much we can do, sir. Install more cameras. Keep your doors locked." I told him I had cameras. Reed nodded toward Martin's yard and said, "Then maybe aim one that way." By mid-September, the knocking started. At first, it was gentle tapping late at night. Then, full-blown pounding. Always the same pattern. 5 hard hits, silence, then footsteps fading into the grass. The first night it happened at 11:47 p.m. The second night, 1:10 a.m. The third, 12:36. I stopped sleeping. I started keeping my phone on the coffee table, thumb hovering over 911. I even kept a crowbar beside the couch, just in case. I told the Crawfords, but they seemed uncomfortable, like they didn't want to get involved. Mr. Crawford said quietly, "Just don't provoke him. He's had issues before." When I pressed for details, he just muttered, "Ask the police." Everything came to a head one Wednesday night. It was raining hard. I'd finally dozed off when I heard glass shatter downstairs. Not knocking, not footsteps. Breaking glass. My stomach dropped. I grabbed the crowbar and crept toward the kitchen. The motion lights flickered on, and there he was. Martin Hale, standing in the doorway, soaked from the rain, clutching a hammer. His expression wasn't angry, it was disappointed. "You ruined it," he said softly. He said you'd understand the agreement. I was shaking. "What are you talking about?" Martin stepped forward, eyes glinting under the flickering light. "The man before you, Mr. Turner, he respected the rules. You took his place. You should have known he raised the hammer." I swung first. The crowbar connected with his shoulder with a horrible crack. He screamed, a high animal sound, and dropped the hammer, but lunged at me anyway. We crashed into the kitchen table. I could feel his hand clawing at my neck, his breath sour and chemical, like bleach. I swung again, once, twice, until he collapsed, gasping on the floor. When the police arrived, they found him barely conscious, bleeding from dozens of small cuts from the shattered window. Turns out Martin had a record, restraining orders from 2 previous addresses, one in Ohio, one in Indiana. They also found notebooks in his house, pages filled with observations about me, what time I went to bed, what I cooked for dinner, sketches of my floor plan, and something else. A note that said, "The agreement continues. One must watch while one lives here." I sold the house 2 months later. Lost thousands, but I couldn't stay there. Even after Martin was taken away, The place felt poisoned. The Crawfords said they understood, though Mrs. Crawford's face went pale when I told her about the notebooks. I live in an apartment now, 4th floor, security cameras, deadbolt, chain, alarm system. I sleep with that same crowbar beside my bed. Sometimes late at night, I think I hear tapping again. Not on the door this time, from the vent. But when I check, there's nothing there. Just the hum of the building and my own heartbeat. My therapist says the nightmares will fade eventually. Maybe they will. But I still get local news alerts from Martin Hale's name, and I still dream about his words. One must watch. I never imagined that the house I'd waited my whole life to own would become the reason I still can't sleep through the night. Last October, I turned 29, just promoted to senior analyst at a logistics firm in Kansas City. My lease was ending, rent had skyrocketed, and I was desperate for something permanent, something mine. The housing market was brutal. Every listing was either overpriced or snapped up within hours, until my agent, Mark, called about a foreclosed property in a quiet suburb outside Liberty. It's old, he warned, and it needs work, but it's listed way under market. Bank-owned. Been empty a while, I didn't need much convincing. When we pulled up, I immediately saw the potential. A single-story ranch-style home, mid-60s build, white siding faded by the sun, and a yard that had once been beautiful, but was now a jungle of weeds. Still, something about it felt quiet. Almost too quiet. Inside it smelled of dust and lemon cleaner. The hardwood floors creaked, the wallpaper peeled in places, but the bones were solid. I remember standing in the living room, picturing furniture, color, life returning to the place. Mark mentioned the previous owner, a woman named Elaine Porter, had lost it after her husband's sudden death. She stopped paying the mortgage. The bank eventually took over. She was difficult, he said vaguely. Neighbors said the eviction was rough. It didn't matter. I signed the offer that same week. The first few weeks were perfect. After work, I'd paint, replace old fixtures, and strip the dated curtains. My friend Tyler helped install new outlets. My mom drove down from Topeka to help with the overgrown garden, hacking through ivy that had practically welded itself to the fence. I fell asleep every night sore but happy, the kind of tired that feels earned. I'd wake to the sound of wind brushing through the trees that bordered the backyard. It was peaceful. My peace. The neighbors, the Jacobs family, were friendly enough. They brought over a pie, said they were glad someone was finally restoring the old Porter house. They mentioned Elaine in passing, how she'd lost her grip on things after her husband's heart attack. Wouldn't leave the place, Mrs. Jacobs said. They had to drag her out screaming. I laughed it off. That kind of small-town gossip always travels faster than truth. But then I started finding things she'd left behind. A stack of handwritten grocery lists in a drawer, a pair of muddy garden gloves in the basement, and strangest of all, a set of framed photos stuffed into a box in the attic. In every picture, Elaine stood in the same spot out front, next to a rose bush that had long since died. Her smile was stiff, but her eyes, they didn't match the expression. It began one Thursday night in November. I'd just finished reheating leftovers, scrolling my phone, when I noticed movement outside. Through the kitchen window, someone stood motionless near the end of my driveway. At first, I thought it was a neighbor walking their dog, but the figure didn't move. Just stood there. A woman, wrapped in what looked like an oversized coat. I couldn't see her face, but I could feel her watching the house. After several minutes, she turned and walked away, her boots crunching across the gravel. I told myself it was nothing, but she came back the next night. Same spot, same posture. This time, she stayed longer. 10 minutes, maybe 15. A passing car's headlights briefly lit her face, thin, pale, hair gray and stringy, framing eyes that looked too wide, too awake. That night, I remembered the Jacobs words. Elaine. Curiosity got the better of me. I looked her up online, found an old Facebook page, last active years ago. Photos of her and a bearded man smiling at barbecues, birthdays, Christmas mornings. They looked happy ones, but the face in those photos was fuller, livelier. Not the one I'd seen under the streetlight. Saturday night, she came to the door. It was close to midnight when the pounding started, so loud I thought someone was breaking in. My heart slammed as I froze, phone in hand. Then came the voice. "This is my house. You don't belong here." I peered through the blinds. Elaine stood on my porch, her coat open over what looked like flannel pajamas. Her fists hit the door again and again. I lived here for 20 years. My husband built that deck with his hands. You think you can just take it? I called 911, whispering to the dispatcher as Elaine alternated between sobbing and shouting. When police arrived, the younger officer greeted her like an old acquaintance. "All right, Miss Porter, that's enough. Let's go." She quieted instantly, her eyes finding mine through the small window. For a moment, she didn't look angry, just studying me, like trying to memorize who'd replaced her. The officer explained later that she'd been living with her sister across town, but kept showing up. "She's not dangerous," he said. "Just lost. Right. Tell that to my front door." For a while, I thought that was the end. But the following week, she returned. This time, staying at the end of the street, holding a lantern that swung back and forth like a signal light. She'd hum old church hymns, except the words were twisted. "This little house of mine, I'm gonna make it shine." Every night she came back. Every night the humming grew louder. I installed motion lights, cameras, even nailed shut the attic window. The Jacobs called police twice on my behalf, but since she stayed off my property line, there was nothing they could do until the restraining order cleared. Then one morning, I found every rosebush I'd planted uprooted and laid in a perfect circle on the front lawn, blossoms facing inward, like some ritual. That night, I didn't sleep. Every creak sounded like footsteps. Friday night, it escalated. A scraping noise woke me around 2 a.m., not from the door, but above me. She was on the roof. Through the vent, I could hear her muttering to herself, her boots shifting across the shingles. Then laughter, low, breathless. Harold always said the roof would leak again. Told him we should have fixed it before the snow. The scratching grew frantic, then turned to pounding. I grabbed the baseball bat beside my bed and locked myself in the bathroom while calling 911 again. When the officers arrived, they found her at the attic vent, prying at it with a screwdriver. In her tote bag were a hammer and a small urn, ashes spilling across the shingles. She screamed that she was only trying to bring Harold home. They arrested her for trespassing and violation of the restraining order. As they led her away, she turned to me once more, face calm now. "You'll take care of him, won't you?" she asked softly. The next morning, a woman came to the door, mid-60s, exhausted, in hospital scrubs. "I'm Marjorie," she said quietly. "Elaine's sister." She held a small plastic container of cookies, hands trembling. "I'm so sorry. We've tried everything. Meds, therapy, even supervision. She just escapes. She thinks Harold's still here. She believes if she can get back inside, he'll come home." Her eyes filled with tears. "She doesn't mean to scare you. She just can't let go." Before leaving, she handed me an envelope. Inside, a handwritten note and a check for $1,500 for your trouble. I hope she didn't ruin your roses. Harold loved them. I couldn't even be angry, just tired. Days passed. The police said Elaine had been transferred to a secure facility in Missouri. I should have felt safe. But the house didn't feel the same. The air carried a heaviness, as if something unseen lingered. At night, I'd catch the faint smell of roses even though I'd thrown the dead bushes out. I started sleeping on the couch with my new dog, a rescued Rottweiler named Diesel, at my feet. Every sound made him growl. Every flicker of motion outside made me freeze. I nearly listed the house, but something in me resisted. This was my home now. I wouldn't let someone else's madness drive me away. Then, 2 weeks before Christmas, my phone rang at 1:47 a.m. It was Marjorie, her voice shaking. Elaine had escaped again. Stole a car from the facility parking lot. They were looking for her. I didn't need to guess where she'd go. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch. Diesel growled low. In the backyard, by the dead patch where the rose bushes had been, Elaine knelt in the dirt. Barefoot, hair matted. Her hands dug through the soil, placing handfuls of ashes into shallow holes. "Harold says the red ones were too angry," she murmured. "He wants yellow this time." She looked up when Diesel barked. For a second, I thought she didn't recognize me. Her eyes were empty. "He's right here," she whispered. "Can't you see him?" I didn't move. I just stood there under the porch light, watching her pat the dirt like she was tucking someone in. When the police arrived minutes later, she didn't resist. She only asked, "Can I finish planting one more?" and mimed placing something invisible in the earth. As they led her away, she turned and said, "Water them every Thursday." Harold liked Thursdays. I never saw Elaine again. Marjorie told me she'd been moved to a long-term care facility in Illinois, one with locked wards and constant supervision. I replanted new roses that spring, yellow ones like she wanted. I even watered them on Thursdays. I tell myself it's out of respect, but part of me wonders if it's guilt. The house feels softer now. Not like a prize I won, but something loaned to me. A few months later, curiosity got the better of me. I found Elaine's son, Thomas, on social media. 33, living in Colorado. He hadn't spoken to his mother in nearly a decade. When I tried to tell him about the roses, he just said, "She's been gone a long time," and hung up. Sometimes, when Diesel's ears perk up at nothing, I catch the faint scent of roses again. Maybe it's my mind, maybe not. Maybe houses remember. Maybe love, or madness, roots itself deeper than we think. The yellow roses bloom wild now, no matter how often I trim them. Their petals spill over the porch rail like they're reclaiming what was once theirs. Sometimes I think, maybe that's exactly what she wanted. I'm a history lecturer at a small college in rural Ohio, and my wife, Clara, runs a small bookkeeping firm from home. We'd been saving for years, scraping every cent together, and finally, in the spring of 2022, we found a place that didn't make our bank accounts cry. A 2-story split-level built in the mid-70s, cream siding, green shutters, and a wide oak tree in the front yard that looked older than the house itself. It wasn't perfect. The roof needed patching. The kitchen tiles were cracked, but it felt like ours. After years of renting, of hearing neighbors through paper-thin walls, this was freedom. The sellers, an older couple named the Burrows, seemed oddly eager to move. They'd lived there for over 18 years, but said they were downsizing to a retirement condo near Florida. When our offer came in, they accepted it immediately, even shaving a few thousand off without us asking. At the time, I thought we'd just gotten lucky. It was 3 weeks later, on a rainy Sunday when I found the door. I was organizing the basement, moving old paint cans, a busted vacuum, and stacks of yellowing magazines when my flashlight caught something strange. A small wooden panel under the stairs, barely 3 feet tall, 2 feet wide. At first glance, it looked like some kind of storage hatch. But when I looked closer, my stomach tightened. The entire frame was covered with nails, not a few, but dozens, driven in at odd angles, bent, splintered, like someone had been in a frenzy. The wood around it was gouged and scarred, as if someone had tried to pry it open before giving up. I called Clara down. She stopped halfway on the stairs and frowned. That wasn't in the inspection report. It wasn't. I'd read every page twice. We stood there for a full minute, staring at it. The silence of the basement felt heavy, almost charged. Finally, curiosity won. I grabbed my crowbar and started pulling nails. Each one shrieked against the wood, sending this awful metallic echo through the basement. The air grew thick and stale. By the time I got the last nail out, my arms were trembling, shirt soaked through. When I pried the little door open, a wave of air rolled out, damp, dusty, and wrong. Not rot exactly, just stale in a way that made my skin crawl. The crawl space was about 6 feet deep, dirt floor, wooden beams. But it wasn't empty. There were piles of old envelopes tied together with brittle rubber bands, the paper yellowed and soft. A small pile of children's toys sat in one corner, a cracked yo-yo, a doll with no head, a small baseball glove that would barely fit a toddler. And then, the photographs. Hundreds of them, scattered across the dirt like fallen leaves. I picked one up. It showed a family of 3 sitting in what looked unmistakably like our kitchen. Another photo, a couple sitting on the back porch. Then another, a man reading in what was now my office. Different families, different years, judging by hairstyles and furniture. But all of them taken from the same exact angles. Someone had been taking pictures inside this house from the same hidden points, again and again. Clara opened one of the mail bundles, and the rubber band snapped apart. The envelopes were all addressed to former residents, the Petersons, the Hungs, the Bellamy family, and one name that came up multiple times, E. Coulter. Every single envelope had been opened, resealed with tape, and scribbled on in pencil. Son home from school 3:10. Lights off at 10:42. Argued again, husband left through back door. There was a notebook too, wrapped in a plastic bag. The handwriting was tiny and painfully neat. It listed details of people's lives, what time they showered, when they had friends over, what shows they watched, what time they fell asleep. And the entries went back decades: 1988, 1991, 2006, 2017. We decided to check the house. In the notebook were hand-drawn floor sketches, not blueprints, but close. Each page had little red circles and notes like "clear audio here," visual line to dining area, new tenants, cautious. My heart started pounding as we followed the marks. In the guest bathroom vent, a small drilled hole no wider than a pencil. In the corner of our bedroom ceiling, another. Behind the water heater, another, pointing right at the downstairs hallway. Each one carefully patched or painted over. Easy to miss if you weren't looking. We found 6 holes in total, and suddenly every creak, every shadow since we'd moved in made sense. We called the police. 2 officers arrived and looked around half interested, until we showed them the notebook. Then everything changed. Detective Ellis, a tired man in his 50s, told us they'd had rumors about the property. Former owners reporting strange things, moved objects, missing mail, pets staring at walls. But nothing concrete. Now, they had proof. They collected the photos, letters, and notebook. We stayed at a nearby motel that night, thinking we'd return after the forensics team cleared the place. The next morning, when we checked out, the motel clerk handed me a plain envelope. "Someone dropped this off for you," he said. No return address, no stamp, just our names, written in that same precise, tight handwriting from the notebook. Inside was a typed note. "You shouldn't have opened that door. You sleep on the right. Clara on the left. Coffee at 7:42. Curtains closed too tightly last night. You should have left them as they were." My hands were shaking so hard the paper crumpled. Clara started crying quietly in the lobby. We gave the letter to the detective that afternoon. He told us they'd send it to forensics, but honestly, there wasn't much to go on. Whoever it was, they'd been watching us. Maybe still were. 2 nights later, another envelope showed up at my college office. Then one at Clara's business mailbox, each one more detailed, more intimate. "You missed a call from your mother at 9:17. Clara used her laptop for 2 hours today. Searching real estate again? Don't bother. You belong there now." We had new locks, security cameras, motion lights, but somehow, the letters kept finding us. The detective called a week later. The name E. Coulter matched property records from 1979. Elias Coulter, a local portrait photographer. He'd lived alone in the house for years after his wife left him. No children, no close relatives. The house was foreclosed in 1986 after he disappeared. No trace, no obituary, nothing. But neighbors remembered him. They said he used to walk around with a camera, taking pictures of families who moved into the area, always saying he was documenting the changing town. One neighbor had even seen him sneaking into people's yards late at night. But when the sheriff questioned him, nothing came of it. After he vanished, the house changed hands 6 times, and every owner, according to Ellis, had moved out within 2 years. 3 weeks later, Clara received a manila envelope at her office. No postage, just "to Clara" written on the front. Inside were photographs, new ones, me sitting at my desk, her brushing her hair in the bathroom, us asleep in bed. The last picture froze my blood. It showed Clara at her office window, taken from inside the building, from the corner near her filing cabinet. That was the last straw. We left that night. Didn't even tell the detective until we were on the highway. We rented a small apartment across the state, smaller than our old place, but we didn't care. I stopped teaching for a while. Clara closed her business. We just needed to breathe again. It's been almost a year now. The house is still on the market. The realtor says people don't feel comfortable there. Sometimes late at night, when everything's quiet, I swear I hear faint clicks, like a camera shutter. Maybe it's just paranoia. Maybe not. The last email I got 2 months ago had no subject line, just one sentence. "You still close the curtains at 7:42. Good. My wife, Emily, and I had been searching for a home for what felt like forever. Almost 2 years of weekend tours, disappointing inspections, and overpriced listings. Then, in early September 2023, we found it. A charming 2-story colonial tucked away on a quiet street in Maple Hollow, Ohio. The place wasn't big or luxurious, but it had character. White shutters, an old oak tree in the front yard, and a wide porch that looked perfect for morning coffee. After so many failed offers, this one felt right. Too right, maybe. The listing had been sitting for months, almost 7 to be exact. But when we asked, our realtor said the owners, an older couple named the Hensleys, had already relocated to Arizona, leaving their son Nathan to manage the sale remotely. He seemed eager to offload it. He even dropped the asking price by $5,000. without us saying a word. Emily called it luck. I called it overdue. By the first week of October, we were moving in, smiling like kids who just unwrapped the best present ever. We painted the living room a warm cream, fixed a broken kitchen cabinet, and even planted hydrangeas out front. Everything felt peaceful. On our third evening, an elderly woman from next door, Mrs. Tucker, stopped by with lemon cookies. "I'm so glad someone finally moved in," she said, smiling through wrinkles that seemed older than the town itself. "I used to see lights on in there sometimes. Always figured the previous owners forgot to turn something off." Emily laughed it off, saying maybe it was the porch sensor light. It was such a small thing. But I remember it clearly now, because it was the first sign that something about our new home wasn't right. The knock came 17 days later. It was a Saturday morning. I was in the kitchen making coffee, wearing my old flannel pajama pants, when someone started pounding on the front door. Not knocking, pounding, like something urgent. Emily was upstairs brushing her hair, so I went to open it. A man stood there, early 40s, balding, holding his phone in one hand. He looked excited, almost jittery. Before I could even say hello, he said, "I'm here for the open house." I'm a little early, but the listing said 9 a.m. I froze. "What open house?" I asked. He frowned, showing me his phone screen. There it was. Our house, listed for sale on some shady-looking site called quicklisthomesnet, complete with photos that looked way too recent. The weirdest part? One picture showed our car in the driveway. Another showed our new porch mat, the one that said, "Welcome to the Petersons." I told him there had to be some mistake, that we owned the home, but his smile faded into irritation. "Listen, I drove an hour for this," he said. "The listing said immediate occupancy. Are you the seller?" I shook my head, but he kept talking, accusing me of lying, saying this was false advertising. When he finally left, muttering under his breath, I shut the door and went straight to my laptop. The listing was real, and not just on one site. 3 others had the same house. Ours, for sale. Each one used recent pictures taken from angles that suggested whoever took them had been inside our yard. One photo was from the backyard, showing the sliding glass door we'd replaced a week earlier. Another, even creepier, showed our bedroom window, with Emily's pink curtains visible through the glass. My stomach dropped. Someone had been close enough to photograph that. Emily came down as I scrolled through the listings, pale as a ghost when she saw them. We tried contacting the websites. No phone numbers, only contact forms. The few that did have hotlines sent us to automated bots that disconnected after endless holds. That entire day, every car that slowed down in front of our house made my skin crawl. And by Sunday, it got worse. Around 6 a.m., when I took our golden retriever, Milo, out, I saw a family standing on our lawn. 2 parents, 2 teenage boys. They were taking pictures of our porch, our mailbox, even our garage. The dad had a measuring wheel, rolling it across the driveway like he was taking specs. The mom was talking on her phone, asking about schools and flood insurance. When I walked outside, half asleep, they smiled and said, "We're early, but the owner said it's fine if we start looking around." It took me a second to realize what was happening. I told them the same thing I told the man yesterday. The house wasn't for sale, and they'd been scammed. But they didn't believe me. The father pulled up his email, and my blood ran cold when I saw the sender's name. Nathan Hensley, the same name as the seller's son. Only the email was slightly off. Nathan Hensley Homes at Outlook, not his real business address. This fake Nathan had been talking to them for weeks, sending detailed info about the home, a fake contract, even a lockbox code. They'd already sent $2,500 as a deposit through Zelle. The mom broke down crying on our porch, and the dad glared at me like I was part of the scam. They refused to leave until I showed them our deed papers. Even then, they left muttering that their lawyer would be in touch. Emily was shaking. We changed every lock that afternoon. By Monday, we'd had 7 groups show up. A man with a moving truck, a retired couple, 2 college kids, all claiming they'd been promised this house. The police came twice. The second officer, a tired-looking man named Officer Burke, told us there wasn't much they could do unless someone actually broke in. He suggested putting up a cardboard sign, "Not for sale," as if that would fix anything. By Wednesday night, Emily and I were barely sleeping. We took turns staying up, watching the windows. Then, at 2:17 a.m., Milo started growling. That low, warning growl I'd never heard before. When I looked through the blinds, a black van sat idling across the street, lights off. 2 men stood on our porch, one of them bent over our lock with something metallic in his hand. "Someone's breaking in," I whispered. Emily was already dialing 911. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept near the stairs and shouted through the door that we'd called the police. One of the men yelled back, "We paid for this house!" "You're the ones trespassing." My heart nearly stopped. The sound of wood splintering echoed through the hall as they forced the doorframe. Then, flashing red and blue lights cut through the night. The police arrived within minutes. The men ran for the van, but didn't make it far. They were caught before they could escape. Both suspects told the same story. They'd been in contact with a Nathan Hensley Jr. for over a month. They'd paid $8,000 for a cash-only sale, were given documents, even closing instructions. They'd been told to arrive in the middle of the night because the current tenants were being evicted. Detective Sarah Milner, who took over our case, discovered something chilling. All the fake listings were created from IP addresses in nearby cafes and libraries, within 10 miles of our address. Someone local was running the scam, someone who had access to our house before we moved in. When police checked the digital lockbox logs, they found entries at odd hours, early mornings, late nights, always when both our cars were gone. And the name tied to the access code? Nathan Hensley. But here's the twist. The real Nathan had reported his laptop stolen 3 weeks before our purchase finalized. It contained saved property documents, listing photos, access credentials, everything. The thief had been using that information to resell homes Nathan had legitimately sold, forging fake deeds and collecting digital payments. 2 weeks later, the police caught him. A man named Evan Porter, a disgruntled maintenance contractor who'd once worked with Nathan. He had over a dozen fake property listings under various aliases and was running scams in 3 states. They found over $270,000 spread across crypto wallets and prepaid cards. He'd been watching the properties he sold, coming back to photograph them and update listings. When we saw those close-up shots of our windows, it made sense. He'd been on our property, probably more than once. 6 months later, we testified in court. Dozens of victims sat behind us. Families, retirees, young couples, all swindled. Evan Porter didn't look at anyone. He just stared at the table as the judge sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison for wire fraud and property impersonation. It should have been closure. But sometimes, when the doorbell rings early in the morning, my chest still tightens. Emily grips my hand a little tighter. And every time I see headlights pause outside our window, I remember that feeling. The fear that maybe, just maybe, someone else still thinks this house is for sale. My name is Emily Ward, and 2 years ago, I signed a lease with my best friend Lena on a big, weathered house just outside a small Oregon town called Miller's Creek. We were both 26, tired of cramped apartments and desperate for some quiet after years of city noise. When we first walked through the place, it felt like something out of a nostalgic dream. Wide rooms with high, cracked ceilings, huge old windows that looked out toward endless pine trees, and wooden floors that groaned softly under every step. It wasn't perfect. A few parts of the house looked unfinished, especially the attic, which the landlord mentioned was sealed off for safety. But the rent was unbelievably cheap, and the thought of all that space was too tempting. We signed the lease that same day. The first couple of weeks were filled with excitement. We decorated the place with mismatched thrift store furniture, painted the walls ourselves, and even hosted a small dinner party where everyone joked about how creepy but cozy the house looked. Lena was a baking addict. Every evening the kitchen smelled like cinnamon, vanilla, or chocolate. Sometimes we'd sit up late, eating her brownies straight from the pan and laughing about how grown up we felt, finally living in a real house. The creaky floors, drafty hallways, and faint knocking from the pipes. They didn't bother us. If anything, they made the place feel alive. That changed after about a month. It started small. A half carton of orange juice gone, a sandwich missing from the fridge, cookies vanishing overnight. At first, we blamed each other. "Emily, you definitely ate that pie last night," Lena laughed. "I swear I didn't," I told her. "Maybe you did, and you forgot." We turned it into a running joke, the ghost of Miller's Creek who steals snacks at night. But the pattern kept growing. One evening I came home from work, opened the fridge, and froze. The leftover lasagna I had made the night before, completely gone. Every single piece. When I asked Lena, she swore she hadn't even opened the fridge that day. That was the first moment a real unease crept in. We tried to brush it off. Maybe we were being careless. Maybe the old fridge didn't seal properly. Or maybe one of our friends had helped themselves during a visit. But the next morning, I found muddy footprints on the back porch. Small, faint, but fresh. Neither of us had been outside since the night before. A few nights later, around 11 p.m., we were watching a movie when the power flickered for a second. The TV went black, and in that sudden quiet, we both heard it. Footsteps. Not the normal creaks of an old house shifting in the cold. These were deliberate, heavy, and slow. Thud, thud, thud. They came from directly above us, the attic. We stared at the ceiling, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. "Did you hear that?" Lena whispered. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely a breath. The attic was supposedly sealed. We had never even opened the hatch in the hallway ceiling. We sat there for a long time, too afraid to move, until finally the sound stopped. The next morning, Lena wanted to check. I didn't. But she was stubborn, so we dragged a stepladder into the hall, right under the square wooden hatch. She grabbed her phone flashlight and pushed the hatch up. A burst of warm, stale air rushed out. Dust rained down on us. Lena climbed halfway up, shining her light around. "Nothing," she said at first. Then her tone changed. "Wait. Emily. Look." I climbed beside her and peered in. In the far corner, half hidden behind some old insulation, was a blanket, an empty water bottle, and what looked like a half-eaten apple turning brown. My stomach turned cold. Someone had been up there. We climbed down fast. Neither of us spoke for a while. We locked every door and window that night, triple-checking the back door. But the next day, the fridge told the truth again. 2 yogurts gone, a slice of bread missing from the loaf. Someone hadn't left. I started to feel like the walls themselves were keeping secrets from us. Every creak, every flicker of the light felt intentional. That evening, Lena suggested calling the landlord. He laughed it off. "The attic's sealed," he said over the phone. "You're just hearing the house settle. It's 100 years old. If you're scared, just keep the hatch closed." That dismissal made me furious and terrified. We couldn't afford to move yet, so we decided to stay until the lease was up. That night, we dragged our mattresses into the same room and left all the lights on. A few nights later, around 2:45 a.m., I woke to a faint noise. At first, it sounded like the rustle of wind against the shingles. Then I realized it wasn't outside. It was above me. A dragging, scraping sound, like something being moved across the attic floor. I nudged Lena awake. She blinked, disoriented. "You hear that?" Her face went pale. "It's been going on for a while," she whispered. We lay there frozen, listening as the scraping turned into soft, deliberate footsteps. And then, silence, followed by the faintest squeak right above the hallway. I looked toward the ceiling, the attic hatch. It was shaking, just barely. And then, creak. The hatch lifted an inch. Someone up there was testing it. I think I stopped breathing. Lena grabbed my hand, both of us too terrified to move. The wooden hatch lowered again, and for a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, from the other side of the ceiling, came a slow, dragging sound moving toward the far end of the attic. That was enough for us. We bolted downstairs and locked ourselves in the kitchen. Lena called 911, whispering so quietly I could barely hear her. The dispatcher told us to stay put, that officers were on their way. Those 20 minutes felt endless. I kept staring at the kitchen door, waiting for footsteps on the stairs. Once, I thought I heard the faint click of a floorboard from above the hallway. Then, flashing red and blue lights outside. 2 police officers entered, guns drawn, sweeping through the house. "Stay here," one told us, and they climbed toward the attic. We listened, hearts pounding. Then came a muffled shout. "Found something!" When they called us up, I could barely make myself climb the ladder. Inside the attic, the flashlight beams caught something we hadn't seen before. A small area behind a section of insulation had been hollowed out. Inside was a sleeping bag, cans of food, a stack of newspapers, and a plastic jug of water. It looked like someone had been living there for weeks. The officer pointed to a narrow crawl space that led down through the wall, framing to the laundry room below. "He's been coming in and out through here," he said grimly. "Whoever it is, he's smart. Probably leaves while you're both at work." They didn't find anyone that night, but one of the officers lifted a paper plate sitting in the corner. On it was a half-eaten sandwich and a few crumbs still fresh. "He was here recently," the officer said quietly. "Maybe even tonight." We didn't sleep. We didn't even pack properly. By sunrise, we had thrown everything we could into our cars and driven out of Miller's Creek. The landlord was furious when we told him we were breaking the lease. We didn't care. For months afterward, I couldn't fall asleep without glancing at the ceiling. Every small noise felt like someone shifting above me, waiting. I moved into a small apartment in Portland eventually. No attic, no crawl space, just flat ceilings and bright lights. But sometimes, late at night, I still wake up certain that I've heard footsteps above me. Slow, careful, deliberate. And I can't help but think about how long that stranger must have been up there, listening to our voices, watching our lights turn off, waiting for the perfect moment to come down. When my wife and I bought our first home, it felt like the start of a brand new chapter. We'd spent nearly 7 years in a small rental outside of Spokane, saving every spare dollar. When we finally signed the papers for a worn-down little house in a quiet Washington neighborhood, I remember standing in the empty living room, breathing in the smell of fresh paint and old wood, feeling like we'd finally made it. The house wasn't perfect, not even close. The floors creaked, the wallpaper peeled in strange patterns, and the kitchen looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. But it had charm. Big oak trees shaded the backyard, and the porch looked out toward a quiet street that curved uphill into pine woods. It felt peaceful, or at least it did in the beginning. Because I worked long shifts as a lineman, we decided to hire a handyman to help finish the remodeling before winter. That's how we met Rick Walters. He came recommended by our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Cooper, an elderly widow who said he'd fixed her roof for half the price and double the care. When he first showed up, Rick looked like every small-town handyman I'd ever met. Mid-40s, broad-shouldered, denim jacket, and a battered gray pickup with tools piled in the back. His smile was easy, his handshake firm, and he had this habit of whistling while he worked. Low, tuneless, constant. At first, I was relieved. Rick knew what he was doing. He moved fast, patched the drywall, fixed the leaky pipes, and even rewired the light fixtures that had been flickering since the day we moved in. But after the first week, I started to notice things. One evening, as I was locking up, I saw the faint glow of headlights outside. Rick's old pickup was parked halfway down the street, engine off, just sitting there. At first, I assumed he lived nearby, but when I took the trash out, I noticed his silhouette in the driver's seat. He waved casually, cigarette ember lighting his face for a second. "Just making a call," he said, voice muffled through the window. "No big deal, right?" Still, I felt uneasy. That night, when my wife, Lydia, asked what was wrong, I almost laughed it off. But something about that smile, the way he sat watching our house instead of driving away, stuck in my mind. The next few weeks blurred together. Rick worked faster than ever, almost too fast. Sometimes he'd be in the house before either of us were even awake. I started finding the back door unlocked when I was sure I'd bolted it the night before. Once, Lydia came out of the shower and swore she'd heard footsteps in the hallway. We both tried to rationalize it. Maybe we'd gotten too used to having someone around. Maybe we were being paranoid. Then Rick said something that froze my blood. We were standing in the kitchen, going over which cabinets to replace, when he glanced toward the window and said, "Curtains look better now that you switched them. The green ones fit your bedroom better." My hand stopped midair. We hadn't told him anything about changing the bedroom curtains. He'd never had any reason to go upstairs. "How'd you know that?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He smiled. "Oh, I just noticed things." After that, I started keeping closer watch. One night, I came home late and saw faint light flickering inside the house. At first, I thought Lydia had fallen asleep with the TV on, but when I walked in, the place was dark. Every light off, every window locked, except for one thing, a pair of muddy footprints leading from the kitchen door to the hallway. They weren't ours. The next morning, I asked Rick about it while he was fixing the porch railing. He chuckled, shaking his head. "Probably tracked it in myself." "Sorry, must have forgotten to wipe my boots," I wanted to believe him. But the mud was fresh that night, long after he'd gone home. By mid-November, Lydia had stopped feeling safe. She kept the blinds drawn even during the day. We'd catch the faint sound of a truck engine outside sometimes, only to find the street empty when we looked. One evening, while I was at work, she called me, whispering. "Rick's in the backyard," she said. "He's by the shed." My stomach dropped. I told her to stay on the phone and turn on the porch light. She did. And through the noise, I heard the creak of the back gate, followed by Rick's voice, calm, unbothered. "Just thought I heard a noise. Wanted to check it out for you." She told him to leave. He laughed softly and said, "You can't be too careful out here." By the time I got home, he was gone. That night, Lydia barely slept. Neither did I. The next morning, I told him we were done. We'd pay for the last few days of work, but we didn't need him anymore. Rick didn't argue. He just stared at me for a moment. This strange blank look, like he was studying me. Then he nodded. "Sure thing," he said. He shook my hand, walked back to his truck, and sat there with the engine off for almost 10 minutes before finally driving away. It should have ended there, but it didn't. That weekend, our dog went wild around midnight, barking toward the back door, hackles up. I grabbed a flashlight and opened the curtains. Rick's pickup was there, parked half hidden behind the trees at the edge of our property. He wasn't trying to hide anymore. He was just standing there, looking straight at the house. "Rick!" I shouted through the window. "What the hell are you doing?" He didn't move. The beam of my flashlight hit his face, pale, calm, and completely unreadable. Then he turned, walked to his truck, and drove off into the dark. We called the police right after. When the officers came, they took our statement, but said there wasn't much they could do. He hadn't broken in, hadn't made threats. "You might want to change your locks," one of them said, handing me a card. That night, I sat in the living room with the lights off, watching the street through the blinds. Every sound, every branch creak, every car passing, made my heart jolt. I kept thinking, we gave him a key. He had access. He knew the layout, our schedule, everything. We'd let him in. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I changed every lock, installed a deadbolt on the back door, and set up cameras facing every corner of the yard. Lydia didn't even want to go outside alone. For the next few days, the street stayed quiet. No sign of his truck, no calls, nothing. Then, about a week later, I checked one of the security feeds. At 3:17 a.m., the motion light near the porch had flickered on. The camera caught only a faint movement, someone standing near the mailbox just beyond the edge of the light. A figure, unmoving, watching. When the light turned off again, he was gone. That was the last time we ever saw anything. Months passed. We tried to pretend it was over, that he'd lost interest, moved away, maybe gotten arrested somewhere else. We started to feel normal again. But even years later, sometimes when the house settles at night or the porch boards creak, I catch myself listening. There's this quiet moment between dusk and full dark, when the world goes still. No birds, no cars, no wind. And in that silence, I swear I can almost hear that same low whistle Rick used to hum while he worked. I never see anyone. But I still get the feeling that somewhere out there, just beyond the trees, someone's watching the house he helped build.